Guys, the big picture here is we'll talk about how to monetize it in the short run, but you want the long-term appreciation is really what we're going for. And the short-term income is just the way to.
What's up, everybody? Mason McDonald and Dan Haberkost here with another episode of the Big Picture Blueprint, where today we are talking about how to invest in farmland. And we mean this as an actual investment strategy with a longer term hold, a 7 to 20 year hold, as versus just the quick flip strategy that we usually discuss on the show. But before we get into this conversation, Dan, which we started getting ahead of ourselves before we hit record. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. We're closing that 187 or 186 acres in South Carolina today. We've got another 240 acres in Colorado. We just got under contract. So I think collectively we have like 1,012 or 1,300 acres in Colorado. We're closing in the next couple months. So we're busy. How about you?
Same. We've got 4,000 acres under contract right now through in the West where we're doing business, and always looking for more and negotiating on more. And, just today signed a lease with a farmer on 160 acres that I own to pay me a little bit in the interim until we end up selling it. But yeah, I think it's going to be a fun conversation. And I think that with all the, heartache and headache with rental properties and stuff like that, this is an investment strategy that I plan on kind of using for the long term, in the various markets that we're doing business in where it makes sense. Great investment strategy. But yeah, today, the show is, I think, a little bit different than where we usually go, because in the land flipping business, even though like a lot of times we're able to monetize these properties for a long period of time, whenever we, buy them and resell them on owner finance terms, we're really trying to sell them as quickly as we possibly can. And this here is kind of an alternative investment strategy compared to rental properties, CDs, savings accounts, or just putting money in the stock market, because it's an asset class that is truly, for the most part, very passive. It's something we have a lot of familiarity with, and it's just less stressful at the end of the day. So we're to like boil down the type of land that we're talking about here. I'd say at least a quarter section of land, which is about 160 acres, in a more agricultural area, think Eastern Colorado, think, 2 to 3 hours outside of civilization, that the majority of your neighbors are using as grazing land for livestock, cattle, sheep, goats, whatever it might be. They're growing row crops. Dan, you grew up on a farm, wheat, corn, different stuff like that. And that the current highest and best use is probably maintaining farm ground in that capacity. And we'll talk about how to monetize it in the short term, how to monetize it in the long term, and why we think it's a great investment thesis.
Yeah. And to expand on that, Mason, I'm doing so much business in the Southeast where most of the farms, of course, there are crop farms, but there's also lots of timber farms. And so that's more of where my mind goes. And it's funny too. I thought back to when I was 16 in high school and working on a tree farm. It was a Christmas tree farm in particular, but it was a tree farm. That was the guy who I managed his rental properties for on the side as well. He was obsessed when we would plant every spring with getting as many seedlings planted into the ground as possible. And a lot of the areas, I'm like, man, I don't know if this is going to grow well. Why does it matter so much? I'm 16. I'm not particularly financially minded. And now I get it, because he saw it as an investment in the land and the land value. And he knew the more total timber he could plant on the property, the greater the value. And it's just funny, 15 years later, almost understanding what that guy was doing and why he was having us squeeze as many little seedlings as humanly possible onto his land.
Oh yeah. Well, and talking about timberland, it is a crop. It's just a different crop, and it usually, depending on what type of wood that we're talking about, is going to just take longer to grow than the seasonal crops that are growing every year or twice a year and stuff like that. So looking at our show notes here, the first thing I put is where to look. And since this is an investment decision, it's not just about putting your money in land, the cheapest land possible that you can get. It's something in the path of progress. And I think about this Alex Hormozy, Dave Ramsey show that I listened to maybe 2 years ago. And Alex, I think, talked about how uh, one of the better investment advices he had ever received is, find a growing city, go to the center of that city, get a measuring tape and measure 30 miles away from that city and buy every single piece of land that you could possibly find. And I think that right there is kind of what we're talking about. Maybe that 30 to 50 mile, range away from these growing cities. Look at the top 50 growing cities in the United States, and then just look outside of it. You wonder where our food comes from, and it's these farms on the outskirts of cities. And with that, you're able to, move into kind of the next phase of the show, which is negotiating on it. Not everyone wants this land. There is, give or take, I've seen statistics that show about 100 million acres over the next 10 years are planning on changing hands. And whenever I'm talking to these farmers, negotiating on very large deals, multiple tens of thousands of acres, they're telling me about all of the problems that they're experiencing that you read about on the news, that the siblings have never even seen the property. The kids have nothing, they want to do with farmland. They're tired of it. They grew up on the farm. They want to get out and go live in the big city. And that presents a unique and interesting buying opportunity for us where we're able to come in, keep the land in a similar use that it's been in for the past 100 or 200 years, but view it as an actual investment strategy. So there's on-market opportunities where you see farmland getting listed all the time. The listing presentation might not look the same as your nice little infill lot that someone's going to build a beautiful home on one day. It might be just a picture of, I've got section maps laying all over my office right now, but just a picture of the map and the legal description of it and what the price per acre is, which gives you a little bit more room, especially since you're going in maybe with the historical approach of how can I get this for as affordable of a price as possible. I'll pause there for a second.
Yeah, a lot there. I'm trying to bookmark everything that I want to say, but guys, the big picture here is we'll talk about how to monetize it in the short run, but you want the long-term appreciation is really what we're going for, and the short-term income is just the way to get a return in the interim. If you do it right, kind of have a guaranteed return if the appreciation you think is coming does not come, and also just allows you to hold it cheaply because, as we'll talk about, you oftentimes times eliminate your property tax bill with a lot of these strategies. So big picture, we're still after appreciation. So really, it's just like rental properties. I do the same thing where, in my mind, the cash flow, yeah, I get a return, or the appreciation up front gives me a nice, healthy return and gets me some of my cash back. But it's the what is it going to be worth in 10 years, 15 years? And this is the same. One other thing I wanted to say on that too, along that train of thought, is I can't believe in Colorado specifically, since interest rates spiked in 22, real estate prices have generally come down. A lot of residential real estate is worth a little bit less than it was then. It's not been dramatic. There's been no crash, but rental rates have also come down a little bit. And at the same time, I can't believe how much the land has gone up. I mean, it's nuts. It doesn't really make sense. I'm not sure why, but many of these parcels that are trading 30 minutes to an hour east of the Front Range were bought much, much more cheaply 3, 4, 5 years ago than they're selling today, even though houses and apartments and commercial buildings are trading at about the same or maybe a little bit less, which is just kind of wild to think about.
Absolutely. I mean, we look at some of the land that we're buying for immediate development and resale with these exempt subdivisions, and they bought it in the 20 teens, 2014 to 2019, and we're paying 2 to 3 times as much as they paid for it, and we still have plenty of margin to double or triple our money on these deals, which makes it a win-win for everyone. They did a great job investing, and it's, the best time to buy is always today or 20 years ago. So moving into how to actually monetize some of this land in the short term, we have a few different options here. So if it's good grassland, it's relatively productive, but it's not cropland. you've got two main options. Well, I guess three. One is you don't do anything at all, and you just let the appreciation, continue at anywhere from 2.5 to 5.5%, depending on how close it is to town per year, which is fine. But with that, even though depending on the state that you're in, it might be zoned agricultural, but you're not going to get an agricultural exemption for that land because you're not actually using it for ag purposes. So you might be paying, uh, you know, in 2 to 3 thousand a year for 200 acres of ag zoned land in eastern Colorado, as versus if you were to option two, lease it to farmers, or option three, enroll in CRP, which is Conservation Reserve Program, which is kind of conducted at the federal level, where you are able to get annual payments on a per acre per year basis. So, on the 160 acres I owned, I just signed a lease today to lease it to the farmer that bought one of the neighboring lots at just $5 a year, which amounts to $800 a year. And it also reduces my property taxes from about $2,000 to, I don't know, like $30 a year, which is a great short-term monetization. And so that rate of leasing to farmers, I'm looking at it at the national level. You could charge anywhere from $0 per year and just view it as a tax saving to anywhere from $15 to $20 or $30 a year. And you start thinking like, okay, well, I've got 200 acres, I could make at $10 per acre per year, which is a pretty decent deal, make $2,000 a year on that, which is kind of like a savings account. And that's one of the more, I guess, conservative approaches that you can use on this. With CRP, looking online, depending on the type of CRP land, you could get payments anywhere from $10 to up to $250 per year, depending on the length of the contract. And a typical CRP agreement is about 10 to 15 years. So at the national average is $65 per acre per year. You start doing the math, and that ends up becoming much better than a savings account, and very easy because the government just pays you once a year. And I see some of these farmers, Dan, I don't know if you ever go on like the CRP website to see who's, collected a bunch, but I'll see stuff of like 2014 to 2024, people that have, that own a tremendous amount of land that they're bringing in millions, like millions and millions of dollars over a 10-year period, depending on how much land they have, which is kind of a cool, exciting strategy for a lot of people that don't know about it.
And what happens if 5 years in, the market's gone nuts and a developer wants to buy my land at 10x what I bought it? Am I stuck in that lease?
No, you can buy yourself out of a CRP lease. So that's something that I'm doing right now, and we've done multiple times before. Say it's a new agreement and they've only received $10,000 or $15,000 in payment, and so you have to pay out, you have to pay back however much is owed on the contract, plus interest. So depending on the deal, that could only be a few $1,000s or, tens of thousands of dollars, depending on where it is in the lease agreement. But if they're buying it at 10x what you paid for it 5 years ago, it's absolutely worth it. And that's something that you can negotiate in any sort of contract that you're actually doing to, split the costs.
Yeah, so there is a way out, which is really important. And two things. One more thing I want to say on what we started with is how to find this, and then I want to fast forward to other monetization strategies. So you still want to look at this land the same way you do the deals that you're doing today, because the idea is that today nobody really wants to develop this, but in the future they will. And when they're ready, whether that's a big or a small developer, whoever it might be, it needs to be developable. And so if you pick the right town and you go 30 minutes outside and you get a great deal, but it's just a crappy flag lot with no road frontage and you have to extend power a mile and there's no good way to split it up, well, you're still going to have a problem monetizing or selling that for a margin, even if the town does grow, right? So you still want to think about it the same way you do the deals that you're looking to monetize today. You just need to be a little further outside of town and be somewhere that you can do one of these strategies in the interim. So important caveat, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, just like with any investment decision, you have to think about if you were to have to turn around and sell it, just like with the savings account, if you're not supposed to touch your savings account, But if something changes or something happens and you need to, you know, you have a liquidity event, you're like, I need money now. It still has to have some sort of current resale value. If it's true just farmland, yeah, maybe you don't have to think about it quite as much like that. But we are viewing this as how to invest in farmland, which means monetization in the short term, medium term, and long term. So great points there. Yeah, I mean, just everything else of access, electric, and future water. If you're using it for a farmer and you're able to drill a well and, you know, put it on solar or something like that, which is a really cheap well operation, you want to make sure there's actually water under there, which is, depending on where you are in the country, could be a deal killer in the long run. Um, Another option is raising your own livestock. Beef prices have been kind of through the roof recently. If you just want to, have kind of your own place to go out and enjoy, raise, 20 head of cattle or something like that, that's an additional investment. You don't make a tremendous amount of money because it costs a good amount of money to raise cattle, but it's something else you can do. And also, just having fun, like being able to go, some of this property is really cool. Like, dude, if you live 45 minutes away and you have four-wheelers and guns and want to go, shoot guns and ride four-wheelers and go play on the land and enjoy it in the meantime, or, depending on where you're at, if you're able to hunt on the land, uh, in Colorado, if you own 160 contiguous acres, you get landowner preference tags, which can be really, really fun. That's stuff you can lease out to hunters and, different short-term monetization strategies. But the point on the short-term money making, you could theoretically make in between, not just on appreciation, but on actual monetization coming into your pocket every single year, anywhere from like 3 to 10% of the purchase of the land, just leasing it back and having like a true passive investment, which isn't that dissimilar to a rental property. Yeah, you don't necessarily get the tax advantages of depreciation because you're not depreciating land, but you also don't get the headaches of, you know, the tenants, toilets, and termites and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So you mentioned hunting, and that was the other thing that I wanted to talk about because I have a number of properties in the southeast that taking a little longer to sell, and people are offering, "Hey, can I lease this from you for hunting?" And I haven't accepted any offers yet, but depending on the acreage, this can go up or down quite a bit. But for smaller acreage, you can get up to like $50 an acre. And if you go big and you're in the hundreds, it might be more like 10 or $15 an acre. But if you start stacking strategies, this can be really effective because I look at some of the properties I've bought, the one that you and I did last year in the Summer Mason, we just sold it to a timber company. And what if we had kept that, paid or gotten paid to have the timber harvested, then signed a hunting lease? And there'd have to be some intentionality there. We couldn't just scrape the whole thing of trees and have no tree cover and then also have a hunter very likely. I mean, it depends if it's more waterfowl, than if you have some wetlands and the trees matter less. But you can start stacking these strategies and actually get a decent chunk of your cash back up front. And then if you're wise about it and it's developable land in the path of progress, 5, 10 years, the appreciation can be really substantial. And I'm seeing this more and more with the prices of many of these lots that we're now buying and selling and what they were worth not that long ago. Um, and so this is high on my radar as well, because like you said, it can be far more passive. Now, leasing to a hunter and selling off the timber isn't as passive as a CRP lease, but you can also get a lot more of a return much quicker.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Which is why it's like one of these strategies where it's like, dang it, I've got a good amount invested in the market, which I'm happy with. Money invested in other properties and stuff like that are a big pain in the butt. And it's something that, additionally, you don't necessarily need the cash to buy this. Farm banks are more than happy to lend at decently competitive rates if you're actually using it as farmland instead of using it as, hey, I want to buy it and, flip it into 5 lots or something like that. You're able to get really good financing on stuff like this. That's not at the typical land loan rate of 11 to 13%. You can get it much, much lower than that, which is cool. The other thing that's kind of like short to long-term monetization of the land is wind and solar leases. I see properties out here that have wind parks on it, that they're paying a good amount of money for ones that are currently operating that, like, on a 900 acre, they're paying them like 50 grand a year for the wind parks that are going through it. And you can use the land. You just can't build on the easements or anything like that. And some of these solar agreements and wind agreements before they construct, pay similar to what the CRP land is, 10, 20, 30, 50 an acre per year. But if they ever end up building on it, go back and listen to our episode with Dakota, I think Dakota, with Community Solar Authority, where some of those contracts end up getting huge. You know, 500,000 to 1,000,000 a year, for like a 50-year agreement, if they ever come to fruition. So it's an additional option to kind of hedge your bet there, depending on what you want the end use to be. But a lot of places, and there are risks with that. There's plenty of wind companies and solar companies that have gone bankrupt in the last few years. But that is an additional monetization strategy. So that's kind of short, medium term. Let's think about the long term, and call it 10 to 15-year hold period on this. So long enough to let a CRP lease expire. You're looking at 2.5 to 5% annual appreciation. And if you think about a lot of these cities that you might live in, like Colorado Springs, for instance, I hear it all the time of people that have lived here their entire lives that are like, this used to be a dirt road, and now there's massive developments going in. I mean, shoot, Pueblo, West Colorado, where you've done a lot of, building. If you had bought all this land 30 years ago, um, it, there's, future growth that keeps going and keeps going and keeps going, and stuff that people never thought would be developed. Like in Colorado Springs, Briargate, where, Dan has property and where I live, that was annexed into the city like 40 years ago. This was not part of Colorado Springs. And now you come here and you're like, this is Colorado Springs. Like, this is a central part of it. And so whenever you're 20, 30, 50 miles outside of a town and you're thinking long term, that land starts, becoming much, much more valuable and could have a huge jump. And so what do you do with it then? That's where the development really comes into play.
Agreed. And well, you can find a lot of this on the county website sometimes, or maybe the Streets and Roads website, where you see, oh, okay, here are the planned extensions on this highway, or here are the planned thoroughfares that are going to go between, such and such highway. There's a perfect example of this. You just referenced Pueblo West. Well, there's a thoroughfare coming from Pueblo, the city, through what has just been desert to Pueblo West. And now all the land on the other side of that is far more valuable. The county came in and bought up the lots at the corner at high values from the people that previously owned those. And this was planned. This was on the website as a future project extending the road from Pueblo West to Pueblo. And there's lots of examples of that. Now, oftentimes don't know when is it going to actually happen, right? They have a proposed timeline, and then what that versus what actually happens doesn't always line up. And so that's where I think it's prudent to have multiple reasons to be buying it, and then also have the monetization strategies in the short term. But yeah, I mean, the people that own land along there are going to do very well, because it's going to be essentially, it's not a highway, but there's only one main highway that runs between the cities. And so this is going to take a ton of traffic every day, and really, really increase the value of all the land around it.
Oh yeah. And there's a few ways to go and look at that. I mean, ask your AI agent, ChatGPT or Google Gemini, of like, hey, what are, the future proposed projects? But go look at the master development plans, at the county level. They'll show you current annexation sites that they're looking at to annex into the city, and future and proposed annexation sites. And if you can get as close to that as possible for the least amount of money possible, that gives you a leg up on the competition, where you could bid a little bit higher of, to be able to actually secure that asset. And different things like in Colorado, which we're talking about a lot because it's our home market for both of us pretty much. There's allegedly, and maybe it'll happen in the next 10 years or 20 years, but a proposed rail that connects Pueblo to Cheyenne, that long-term plans all the way up and down the Front Range. I mean, from New Mexico to northern Wyoming, that if that ever comes to fruition, a lot of this land that is close to the I-25 corridor that's selling for like 200 an acre, um, might end up growing in value tremendously because people are like, oh, you mean I can live south of Pueblo on a nice little ranch and commute to Denver every day because I can take a train? Uh, there's you have to be aware of not just the future developments, but the future infrastructure that is proposed in whatever market that you're actually doing business in. Because if you're aware of that, and not everyone is, I mean, it's surprising how unaware people are of 3,000 home developments that are going on in different parts of their market that they're like, oh, I just didn't read about it because I don't keep up with the planning commission meetings and stuff like that. So that's really kind of the inflation hedge, which is a bet or a gamble a little bit of instead of going up, 2 to 3% each year, and then in 10 years something happens that makes it go up an additional 200 or 300%. That you need to be aware of. So in addition to that, it's the same monetization strategy. You just ended up holding the land for a long time that we're talking about here, which is exempt subdivides, minor subdivisions, or major subdivisions, depending on how close it is to the city, which could do anything from double to 10x the value of your land whenever you actually go in and do the improvements.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I just had a little more thought or one more example as far as things that are in process that a lot of people just aren't paying attention to. And if I knew this area more, I mean, the new airport in Vegas is in process. That's gonna happen. It's very analogous to what they did in Colorado up by Denver, where Stapleton was the airport. I want to say in the '80s and before, or maybe into the '90s, and then it got too busy, and Denver got too big, and there was no significant land in the city, and so the IA was built way out on the plains, right, 30 minutes outside of town, and then that became the main airport, right, because the city had grown so much. Well, anyone that's flown in and out of Vegas knows that Harry Reid is madness all the time, and so they're planning, and it looks in process, an airport down by Primm by the California, Nevada border, same sort of thing where it's like 20, 30 miles outside of town, just like in Denver, and the land out there is certainly gonna go up in value all around that because that's gonna just be an enormous economic hub. So, again, speaking to your, point about longer time horizons, this would be a great potential play there. And even in the interim, there's going to be speculators and speculating, and you could probably do some shorter term flips, honestly, just because of the buzz around it. So there's examples of this all over the place.
Yep, absolutely. And depending on where the land is, some of it will be easier to monetize than other. Desert land might be a little more challenging. There's not great grazing capabilities or anything like that. But, and just one clarifying point whenever we're talking about CRP land for the, short-term monetization strategy is we're talking about CRP, Conservation Reserve Program. We're not talking about conservation easements, which a lot of times those ones you cannot get out of. That is an operation in perpetuity to make sure the land stays as is. And that is a good monetization strategy, but it's something that, you might be looking at holding forever, type of thing. So just something to consider whenever you're looking at the different ways to monetize in the short, medium, and long term. But Dan, I feel like this is kind of a good summary of how to use a lot of this land that we're currently buying that if we didn't want to or need to monetize it immediately within like a 6 to 12 month period of time, that you could end up having a lot higher returns. And yeah, it's not as great of a return if you're doubling your money every 6 months over and over and over again, but it's a great hedge against inflation. It's going to continuously go up. There's going to be continued great buying opportunities over the next handful of years. And it's a little bit lower stress of, I wouldn't be stressed out saying, yeah, I've got 200 acres I own just east of town that, I'm making a little bit of money on. It's about as much as I make on a savings account. And 10 or 20 years from now, I'll decide to sell it or do something with it.
Yeah, well, you mentioned, if you're doubling your money every X months in an active business. Well, if you effectively do that, eventually you have a bunch of money, and doubling it, the larger it gets, becomes harder and harder. And so these strategies are more for somebody that has a significant nest egg and isn't sure where to put their money, right? Doubling 100 grand isn't that hard. Doubling a million gets harder. Doubling 10 million gets much harder, so on and so forth. That's why, like Buffett has always said, over time, Berkshire's returns would go down over time because they have so much money. There are so few assets that can deploy it in. Anyways, I'm getting off topic, but so this is not a strategy for day one investors. This is more a long term strategy for people that have created a nest egg and need an alternative place to put it. And speaking to diversification, it's kind of amazing that while houses and apartments and strip centers have come down right along the Front Range in Colorado, the land just out east has continued to go up. So it's a great, potentially non-correlated asset. Less correlated, maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, and it's so cool too because you could buy this land from a farmer and lease it right back to them.
Yeah.
They get a bunch of cash in their pocket. They're able to lease the land back and keep using it. So it can create real win-win-win solutions with everybody involved, depending on how you do it. So hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We view this as an investment strategy that both of us are probably going to start doing a lot more of to monetize in the long term rather than the short term with how to invest in farmland. But this is Mason McDonald and Dan Haberkas with the Big Picture Blueprint signing off.